These are the 14 most popular FPV drone simulators, and I've just spent the past 4 weeks testing all of them. So today I'm going to show you which ones are truly worth the money, starting with the least expensive and moving up to the most expensive, and then I'll rank them into 7 categories so you know which one is best for you. First up are our 2 free FPV simulators, FPV Skydive and DJI Virtual Flight. These are both completely free-to-play sims, with FPV Skydive having the option of in-game purchases, which we'll get to in a moment. For now though, we need to talk about DJI Virtual Flight. Last year, this was a mediocre simulator that I gave a reasonably low rating to, 2 out of 10. This year, however, well, DJI has officially discontinued any support for their simulator since March 2024. On top of that, they've also dropped app support for flying with the Goggles 2 and Goggles Integra, and if you weren't aware of why that's such a big deal, it's because the only way you can actually fly with DJI's controller is by connecting it to the app through the goggles. There is no direct input for the controller, and nope, unlike every other FPV simulator that we're testing today, you can't use a non-DJI controller. It just simply will not work. As a summary, DJI Virtual Flight, under pretty much no circumstances, should ever be downloaded again. It doesn't even deserve a rating here, but for the sake of this video, I'll put it on D tier. That brings us to the second free simulator, FPV Skydive. Now, this sim, when you first download it, comes with 2 drones unlocked, regular freestyle and regular racing. By selecting either of those drones, you see that we also get access to 4 different modes: racing, challenge, freestyle, and multiplayer. All in all, this is a very strong start for FPV Skydive here, considering that it is an entirely free simulator. But it's only once we start diving into it a bit more that we quickly stumble across its paywall limitations. You only get access to a few racetracks, less than half the maps, and a small amount of the training lessons. If you want any more of them, you're gonna have to pay. And to be honest, if you're gonna pay, the next few simulators are much more worth your money, so I'll only really judge this from a free perspective. The maps do run smoothly, the multiplayer has active rooms, and the simulator does get regular updates, which is a point worth noting. Where it does fall apart, however, is in the flight experience itself. The physics of the drone in comparison to real-life flying is pretty mediocre. The racing is okay, it's just not super interesting and has a very limited selection. Then finally, the flight school, as it's called, which is simply beginner training lessons, is actually reasonable, but still very text heavy. And again, after you complete the bare basics of learning, you're hit with a paywall to unlock the rest of the lessons. So all in all, I'm putting FPV Skydive in C tier, which, as you'll soon see, actually beats a few of our upcoming paid for simulators. So, without any further ado, let's move on to the Curry Kitten FPV simulator. This is our first paid for simulator today, coming in at a hearty $2. Now, this actually has one major difference to every other simulator here, and what is it? It is this. Yeah, that's the YouTube logo. And no, I'm not about to ask you to subscribe, unless you think that's something that you might want to do, in which case please do. But no, instead, this logo is representative of this man right here. This is Curry Kitten, and if you haven't put 2 and 2 together yet, Curry Kitten FPV simulator, Curry Kitten YouTube channel, yeah, this simulator was created by an FPV YouTube creator. Now, this isn't going to skew any of my testing, but it is super cool to have a simulator created from scratch by a solo YouTuber. Anyways, getting into the actual sim, the main menu is unfortunately a mess, and I find it really difficult to open up the different settings pages, so holy heck. Cheers. I find it really difficult to open up the different setting pages simply because I can never actually find them. And then once you do get through the main menu and get into one of the 3 maps, although they are large maps, there are a very limited number of things to actually do within them. Top that off with no ability to customize a drone, no training program at all, and less than ideal physics. This is a hard simulator to give many props to. Obviously, I have a massive amount of respect for Curry Kitten putting the simulator together nearly 5 years ago, but without any updates since 2022, a massive lack of features, and limited maps, this simulator does go straight to D tier for me. Now, if you were to pay $6 for a simulator, which happens to be 3 times as much as Curry Kitten's simulator, what would you expect? The same value as a $2 sim? 2 times more value? Well, no. Surely when you're paying 3 times more, you expect 3 times the value, right? Allow me to introduce you to FPV Freerider, the sim that costs 3 times as much as the last and delivers an even more underwhelming experience. When you open up the sim, this is the menu that you get presented with, which, in my opinion, is not exactly the prettiest thing for the eye, and sadly, when you do start to fly around, you'll find that the maps are as small as my will to live. All of that to say, the maps are tiny. There's absolutely no drone customization, no good graphics, and no training program either. The only two things going for this simulator are actually its physics and also the racetrack generator. Believe it or not, the physics are surprisingly good and the auto racetrack generator works pretty damn well. However, these two pros don't overrun the many negatives of the simulator, landing at a place in D tier. Now look, when I made the simulator video last year, you guys mentioned that FPV Freerider is actually an outdated version that I needed to test FPV Freerider Recharged. So, of course, I bought it for $10 in the hopes that I would be able to revive FPV Freerider's name. And you can probably imagine my face when I opened it up and saw that this was the menu screen. Really? This again? Okay, so same tests here. The maps, they're still tiny, there is still no drone customization, and they replaced the racetrack generator with an entire level editor. That's great if that's your thing, but I actually love the simplicity of an auto generator, so yeah, cool. Even less pros than before. But alright, not everything is doom and gloom. The graphics have had a massive boost and now look really good. So combine that with the reasonably solid physics and maybe we're looking at a viable option here, but I don't know. I'm still going to rate it D tier as it's not worth $10 and it would have been much nicer if they just updated the previous version of FPV Freerider instead of making you fork out more money for a brand new sim that is kind of the same thing. Thankfully though, this current series of mediocre sims has got the chance to have its streak broken by our next option. Everybody, please welcome in DRL Simulator to the video. This sim costs the exact same amount as FPV Freerider Recharged, that being $10, so really, it doesn't have much to compete against in this price range, but look, this was my first ever simulator when getting into FPV, and to be honest, it's what taught me the ropes of flying from knowing absolutely nothing to being able to get my drone into the sky. More on that in just a moment though. First things first, we finally get something to bless our eyeballs with when we open up the main menu. It's reasonably intuitive to use and has a mega amount of features throughout the whole sim. To name a few of them, we've got freestyle, racing, multiplayer, training, live tournaments, tryouts where you can become a DRL pilot, a track editor, and a physics modifier as well. Once you jump on in, you'll finally have the option of 29 different maps, most of which are really blimmin' massive as well, with heaps of things to fly around and through. The maps have all got a variety of different racetracks built in, with the added option of racing on hundreds, if not maybe thousands too, of community-made tracks. The possibility of you getting bored within the simulator is seriously slim. Like, yes, it has drone customization, it has community-made drones, it has reasonable graphics, plus it also has that DRL tryouts option too. Now, what the heck is DRL tryouts? Well, one of the super funky things about DRL is that it's actually a live TV show where top FPV pilots race each other in some of the world's most iconic stadiums and spots. And if you've ever wondered how to get yourself involved in the very exclusive DRL racing world, the tryouts game mode is actually your golden ticket here. If you are good enough and win the tryouts tournament, you'll see yourself getting drafted up for the next big DRL race. Very cool stuff if that's what you're after, but for me, it's still not the best part about this sim. Back when I first got started into FPV, completely by chance, I downloaded the DRL sim and started learning through its training program. This turned out to be one of the best decisions I have ever made in my FPV journey because the DRL training program is still to this day one of the best training programs that we have in FPV. It'll take you from a complete noob to flying full acro with as little of a learning curve as possible. Then finally, there's the physics modifier. Last time I raved on about this, but in all reality, I have never used it and would have no idea how to make simple changes within it, so I have to base the physics off of their natural feel without modification. All of which is to say that the physics are okay. To be honest, the only thing I can really fault this sim on is the graphics. They are by no means bad, but they do not seem to hold up to the same standard as what's coming up later in the video. But look, combine the variety of the simulator with the insanely good training program, and we are looking at our first A-tier rating. Simulator number 7 is one with a name that screams 2025, that being the AI Drone Simulator. Now, I really wish I could have you all hyped up for this one as it does sound really great, but after paying $15 and opening up the main menu, this is what we're looking at. Like, yeah, I get it, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it by no means gives me much hope in what we'll actually be able to get out of this simulator. To put it into a nutshell, it offers a decent amount of different maps, all of which are huge and highly detailed. Another perk on the maps too is that you're able to download and play within community-made maps, so that's pretty rad. And then on top of all of that, the graphics actually run reasonably smoothly depending on the map. The downside to all this though, unfortunately, the physics are actually awful. I used to think that they were okay, but after flying some of the other simulators that we have on the list today, I can assure you that these physics are super floaty. The racing element feels like it's lacking a little bit here too. There are no beginner lessons, and there's also no multiplayer. So for the price of $15, I'm giving this sim a C tier rating. But hey, not all is doom and gloom. Our 8th simulator of the day is called Uncrashed. Last year, it won my most fun simulator category, which in itself is exciting. However, since then, it's also had a few updates which solve some of my problems that I used to have. So let's dive right on into this $15 simulator. First up, the UI has had a total refresh and now looks a whole lot more like something that is going to be promising. And alongside that, there's also been the addition of multiplayer mode, which, to be honest, has actually been really fun in just the free flight mode. It makes simulator flying feel that little bit less alone and more like you're actually out there with other people flying. Of course, however, because these are new additions, this can't be how it won the most fun sim last year, right? Instead, last year, it all came down to the insane amount of things to do within the simulator. There's freaking monster trucks, motorbikes, race cars, flying cars. You literally name it, it's probably got it. And then to sweeten the deal, the graphics are really flippin' good and they run really well on my lower end laptop. I even found something recently, which I have no idea how long it's been within the sim, but if you head onto the map with some of the race courses, you can literally jump into the different cars and drive them around. I mean, look, I know it's got nothing to do with FPV drones, but come on, that is pretty rad. Anyways, another massive issue I had with the sim last year was the fact that there was no racing against other people, and with the introduction of multiplayer, that is a totally different ballgame now. I do have to admit that I find the physics a little bit limiting when it comes down to racing, as I am super accustomed to how my race drone flies in reality, not how uncrashed drones fly. But with a little bit of practice, I can see how racing in the sim would be totally fine. Finally, my other pain point was the lack of a beginner's training program. Again, however, this has also been solved. Well, at least it's been started. Let me explain. When starting out, a beginner needs to have nerfed controls and locked axes. That means if you're learning how to hover, like Uncrashed offers in their first lesson, the throttle needs to be way less sensitive, and it also needs to be the only movement on the drone that the controller will control. So no yaw, no pitch, no roll, nothing other than throttle, no matter where the sticks are. Without these basic limiters, I 100% would have quit learning FPV drones just due to the overwhelm and intensity of the controls. But because the DRL simulator does everything I just mentioned, I was able to learn everything at a much slower pace and with a level of control that was challenging, but also understandable. So that is all to say that there is definitely a good start to the whole Uncrashed training program, but it's still quite a difficult training program, and it's got some work to do. But hey, overall, this simulator might have had one of the largest growth periods over the last year, going from last year's rating of 6.5 out of 10, which is probably around a C tier, all the way up to A tier this year. Well done, truly. I cannot wait to see how much better the simulator gets in the next year. Now though, we get to look at a completely different dedicated FPV sim. And what I mean when I say dedicated is all to do with the limits. You see, until this point, every simulator has tried to be the absolute best overall simulator, trying to master just every element possible. What no one has done is specifically build an entire simulator dedicated to just one of those elements. That element, in our case here today, is tiny whoops, and the sim is called Liftoff Micro Drones. I'll still be judging this simulator based on its overall performance, but I think it's a massive positive having a dedicated simulator to these tiny little flies, as they're generally the drones that I recommend beginners get started with. That means hopefully this simulator has got a little bit of an edge above all the others when it comes to being beginner friendly. But as we already know, there are a few other factors that come into play here too. So let's explore them. First up, we can see that there is a multiplayer mode, a tutorial, race mode, and freestyle mode. That's great to nail the basics, and I'm even happier to note that the tutorial is actually halfway there to being really great. The axes are partially locked, and you do get a solid demonstration helping you through. The only things that I feel are lacking to me are the instruction completion signs, and also the fact that it feels way too over-responsive for any beginner's first time. It's really not bad at all, and it just needs some finessing over time to make it a little bit more comprehensive. Moving on over to the flight experience. You've got a decent 12 maps to choose from, some of which are just nighttime versions of themselves, but they're all big enough to be fun to fly the tiny whoops throughout. Speaking of which, the physics are another massive point of difference here too. Now, I don't know how much has actually been tweaked on the back end, but the physics definitely feel relatively close to that of a tiny whoop in real life. This is seriously important, as these lightweight creatures drop out the air faster than you can hit skip on those damn YouTube ads.
Raid, Shadow.
Yeah, got you there, didn't I? I wouldn't do that to you. Combine the solid physics with enough maps and reasonable graphics, and you know what? I'm happy to give this simulator an A tier. And I know at this stage you're probably thinking, we've gone through so many simulators already, are they really going to get much better? And well, lucky number 10 might just be able to answer that question for you. This is a simulator that I absolutely shat on last year, and in my opinion, I still think it was justified. There was a lot on offer, but the issue came down to it just not being able to run smoothly on my MacBook M1. And while it's certainly no gaming computer, up until this sim last year, I'd never run into any major issue while trying to play a sim. With that being your background knowledge here, let's bring in Trip. This is a simulator that costs $17, and with its most recent updates, I think that we might actually be getting somewhere. Just so we're all on the know here too, I'm still running the exact same MacBook M1 as I did last year. It's just the new results might actually surprise you a little bit. First up, there are 5 huge maps to fly within, and when I say huge, I'm not meaning average, I really do mean huge. Then on top of that, there are another 8 new maps to fly within too, all of which are much smaller, however, have got one of the coolest points of difference ever. Each of these maps has supposedly been scanned and accurately recreated within Trip from real life places. Like, even I recognize some of the random bandos just from having seen talented pilots ripping around them on YouTube. Not to mention having Joshua Bardwell's house on here now too. Good job. Within the larger maps, they all do have something to chase or do around the place, be that cars, planes, skydivers and whatnot, but I do always find that I'm hitting the go option to start the scenario, and by the time I'm back to my controller sticks ready to actually go, old mate Skydiver has already sent himself hurtling towards the ground. So it would be cool to have these automatically on a loop, or at least give me a build up to get ready. Anyways, moving on, the physics have also supposedly been improved using real life data, and look, if I'm being real here, I don't know how much of a difference I'm really noticing. However, it does feel less floaty than most of the other sims that we've tested today, and I'm all for trying new methods to get the best physics possible. So wrap this tasty patty of features inside a beautifully presented bun, the graphics, and we're whipping up one of the most appealing sim burgers ever. At this point, there's really only one thing that grinds my gears. Imagine whipping up this insane burger. It's got the top ingredients, crispy lettuce, glazed buns, but then you decide to jump on Temu, find the cheapest sauce you possibly can, don't even bother to taste it, and squeeze just a little drop right on top of that burger patty. 90% of people are never going to notice, but for the select 10% who do, well, they'll probably never try a burger ever again. And look, as harsh as I might sound, this sauce does exist right on the Trip homepage in the form of this little button, the Learn to Fly tutorial. Now, the 10% of people who buy Trip as their first ever simulator and their gateway into FPV are going to be looking for a way to learn to fly FPV, right? And unfortunately, even though there is an outdated tutorial pop-up, there is no mention of it being the most difficult tutorial to exist on any simulator. It's so freaking hard to complete, it's still got like the same grammar issues that it did last year, and it still doesn't lock off any axes or tone things down at all. I really think that this tutorial section is going to put more beginners off the hobby rather than encourage them to seek other ways to learn how to fly. They'll just do exactly what I would have done had I been put into this position as a beginner and say, oh shit, this is literally impossible. Then for some, that's going to be the end of that spark. Personally, this is a massive issue for me being able to recommend this to beginners right now, and I just wish it was removed until a better tutorial can take its place. With all that being said though, Trip has, for the first time in this video, scored an S tier rating. So congratulations, the new scanned-in maps, along with how smoothly it seems to be running on my M1 MacBook now, have taken the simulator from middle of the pack to being at the top. This next simulator though is one that was so highly requested that it's not even funny. The catch here is that I haven't actually been able to play it up until September last year when an update was released taking it from PC only to macOS compatible. Let's go, baby! This simulator is called FPV Logic, and it comes in at a fairly pricey $20. So you see, as the prices increase, so do my expectations, as I'm now basing my judgments off of cheaper simulators. So with that being said, what does FPV Logic offer that no one else has so far? Well, that's the issue. Nothing really at all. It's not to say that it's a bad simulator. It just doesn't do anything better or even as well as previous simulators like Trip, Uncrashed, or DRL. It also sadly does not run very well on my M1 MacBook, which is kind of saying something when you consider the fact that Trip, with its much larger and detailed maps, now can run smoothly. To wrap all that into a little nutshell, I'd just say it feels limited. I can appreciate the fact that it's still being updated regularly, but for the price, I think you're better off getting one of the previous sims. I'm rating this one B tier. That then brings us onto a crowd favorite, Liftoff. Liftoff is one of the most popular simulators out there and comes priced the exact same as FPV Logic, $20. Now, upon opening, I think this might be one of the most intuitive UI experiences so far. It's simplistic, it's straight to the point, and there are no fancy descriptive words. Inside the menu, you'll find tons of features like racing, freestyle, free flight, multiplayer, track building, drone building, and a training program. More on the training program soon though. Alongside the plethora of large maps, including Joshua Bardwell's house, there's also the option to add in moving options like cars. Now, this is unfortunately an additional $4, which isn't anything crazy, but considering it comes as standard on all the previous simulators, I'm not the biggest fan of it. Anyways, the graphics and physics both work fine, neither of which are going to blow your mind, but also neither of which is going to leave you frustrated at all. Moving into one of my favorite features from last year, the freestyle mode. It's a pretty cool flight mode where your tricks are counted up as points and you challenge yourself to beat your own freestyle score. Think of it like racing against yourself, but for freestyle instead. Speaking of racing though, this was something that I had a bit of a gripe with last year. Previously, it felt like the guides for racing between the gates were just way too hard to see. And for me at least, I mean I am half blind, but for me at least I was constantly losing where my next gate was. Believe it or not though, an update has been put out that fixes my issues since then. So there's now a much clearer indicator similar to that of DRLs, and I am all for it. They also still have the only other training program that actually comes close to being as good as DRLs. It's still not quite there, and it's too sensitive for new beginners, but the fundamentals are much better than anything else on offer. Well, DRL aside, of course. So with this being one of the most refined, good at everything simulators, it's taking itself straight to the top with an S tier rating. Okay, time to up the cost. This is the second most expensive simulator overall, and to be honest, I'm not sure I'm even allowed to call it a simulator. Mainly because this simulator, which costs $30, is called DCL The Game. Now look, it's basically got the same name as DRL, Drone Champions League, DCL, and Drone Racing League, DRL. The thing here though is that these two simulators are just majorly different. While DRL tries to be an FPV drone simulator, DCL is hyper-focused on making itself into a gamified experience. Not only do you race to win in-game money, but you then get to save up and buy yourself in-game drone skins, different trails, and badges, I think. Now, while this is a very cool gaming experience, you quickly come to realize that this is by no means a good simulator. The reason being is that the physics are just kind of awful, and there's really nothing to do other than race and freestyle on large static maps. Like, it does this one thing really well, gamifying racing, but really it doesn't do anything else justice whatsoever. At $30, your money is absolutely better spent elsewhere, and as a simulator, DCL gets a C tier rating. Now, with that being the slightly underwhelming experience of our second most expensive simulator, I wouldn't be surprised if you begin to have your doubts in the most expensive sim today. Now, I've thrown a wee bit of a curveball into this one here because truthfully, the base simulator itself costs $21, meaning it's technically cheaper than DCL. However, when you add on the Freestyle pack and the Tiny Whoop pack, you end up spending $33. And yes, I do have a good reason as to why you should add those packs on, but we'll get to that in just a moment. First though, What is the simulator? Well, it's another one of the most popular simulators out there, Velocidrone. This simulator by a long shot has got the absolute best physics around. Like, it won't be 100% accurate, but it sure is 100% transferable. Combine this with the insanely large community of racers who all utilize Velocidrone to practice their races, an army of freestyle pilots who use it to hone in their tricks, and also a small sub-niche of people who utilize the tiny whoop side of things as well. This is all sounding pretty spectacular right now, so I'd better hone it back in with a negative or two, right? Okay, firstly, there's no training program at all. Secondly, the graphics are nice, but nothing to go crazy over. Thirdly, the UI isn't exactly what I would call intuitive. The thing here though, is I can honestly see through a lot of these things thanks to the simple robustness of the simulator. I will admit, it's certainly pricey in comparison to everything else, but if you're starting out and have already learned the ropes of flying, you can practice all day on the tiny whoop tracks and hone in those skills. Or if you're a freestyle pilot wanting to nail a new trick, what's not a better place to start than the one that mimics real life the closest? And then of course, if you're a racer, this simulator is just a no-brainer. I can't think of a better simulator for multiplayer racing than this. All in all, this sim is getting an S tier rating. Okay, holy shit, that was a lot to go through, but now that all the sims are covered, the time has come to pick out the winners within our 7 different categories. Starting off with category 1, the best choice for beginners. Last year, the winner won thanks to its super in-depth program and simplistic platform. And without a doubt, this still hasn't changed. So drumroll please, the winner this year is again DRL. I will say that I've actually got a surprising runner-up here though. This runner-up has been chosen thanks to its dedication to beginner-friendly drones and also just having one of the better training programs, even if it's not as comprehensive as I'd like it to be yet. The runner-up for best choice for beginners is Liftoff Micro Drones. If this beginner category is sounding like it's great for you and you want to learn how to fly FPV drones like a pro in just 90 minutes, head down to the first link in the description. I've made you an entire workshop that'll take you from flying like this to flying like this. You'll learn how to master that frustrating hover, crash way less, and you'll discover how to fly faster while staying in complete control. I've also thrown in an exclusive FPV drone bundle system for you to follow. It's got setups that are affordable and future-proofed, faster and powerful, along with top tier and streamlined too. That's the first link in the description down below, and I look forward to seeing you there. Alright, next up for category 2, we've got the best choice for realistic physics. This all comes down to what simulator feels like it replicates real life as closely as possible. It'll make transferring your skills that you learn in the sim to your real life drone way smoother. And it'll also feel more natural to fly within a sim instead of it feeling like a floaty game. The winner for this category is, well, kind of course, Velocidrone. It just simply has got the most realistic feel, but I will say, the runner-up is pretty hot on its heels this year. That runner-up being Trip. Okay. Category 3 is the best high-performance graphics. This is a very subjective category, but it aims to isolate out the best-looking graphics that run the smoothest on non-gaming computers. In my testing, I'm using the MacBook M1 from 2020, and the winner here goes to Uncrashed. It is still by far the smoothest, most beautiful-looking simulator. Again though, it does feel like the runner-up is hot on its heels as well. Also again, that runner-up being Trip. Okay, next up is category 4, the best choice for racing. For this, I'm looking at comparing real-life races to how they're handled in the sim, and with that being the case, a winner here is Velocidrone. I've decided to choose our runner-up as a mix between reality and fun, but also just being fairly dedicated to racing in general, and that makes the runner-up here DRL. Okay, category 5 is a brand new one this year, and it's called the best choice for micro drones. Tiny whoops, essentially. Now, I'm basing this off of realism, simplicity, and the dedication to tiny whoops as a whole. Of course, that does quite easily make our winner here Liftoff Micro Drones. However, as a runner-up, I've actually chosen an interesting choice. This runner-up has got the most realistic feeling tiny whoops, and you can fly in a huge amount of maps. It's just you're limited to the selection of tiny whoops in comparison. Their runner-up is Velocidrone. Okie dokie, category number 6, the last one before we pick the ultimate FPV drone simulator of 2025. This category is the most fun simulator. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Anyways, the winner for this is not quite what I personally expected, but it is indeed Trip. With the new real-life scanned-in areas and plenty of things to do on the huge maps, I would really struggle to get bored. The same is also true for our runner-up here, just on a slightly lesser scale. The runner-up is, of course, uncrashed. So you now know what that means. We're on to category 7, the ultimate FPV drone simulator of 2025. This category takes literally everything into account, from the price to the graphics to what features are offered in-game. Funnily enough, with all of my testing, it's interesting to see that the winner doesn't actually have many standout features. Instead, it excels at creating an all-around good experience in all but one area. The one lacking area being the training program. Everything else picks up for it, however, and the variety combined with an amazing flight experience brings us to our winner. So please, drum roll for the ultimate FPV drones. I'm not gonna do that. So please, drum roll for the ultimate FPV drone simulator of 2025, Velocidrone. Yeah, you might be as surprised as me to hear that, but it is the one simulator that I will now be recommending to the majority of pilots should they ever ask. Of course, we do also have a runner-up here, which has its differences, but still is highly deserving of being here. It's again an overall solid simulator. It's not actually missing any features like a training program, but it's just not as great of a simulator as Velocidrone. So the runner-up for 2025 is Liftoff. So now that you've got your simulator picked out, if you're sitting there wondering, what FPV drone, remote controller, and goggles do I need now? This video has got your answers. It runs through complete drone bundles from $100 all the way up to $1,800, and it covers all the in-between as well, so there really is something for everybody here. We'll see you shortly.